Death is the one story every life shares, but the conversations around it rarely happen. Welcome to the show that opens the doors to the funeral profession. The people, the stories, and the truths most never hear. This is As the Hearse Turns.
Hey, everybody, good evening and happy Thursday. I tell you what, this has been something that has been on the calendar for the last couple months that I have just absolutely been incredibly excited for to be able to speak with Mr. Duane Hills. The history, the knowledge and the passion that this man brings to funeral service is truly unmatched. So it is going to be a phenomenal evening of history and some stories within the lines of professionalism, folks. So I want to just put that disclaimer out very early on that there are some things that just are not going to be discussed because we are professionals and there is still a level of trust and honor that funeral directors carry even into semi-retirement. And there's probably something a little along the lines of legality called a non-disclosure agreement that probably still carries on into death. So, as you can see, unfortunately, again this evening, Catherine is away. She is traveling, but she is on her way back, and I'm sure if she has the opportunity, she'll jump into the comments. However, I did mention that I was going to have a very special co-host this evening join me on As the Hearse Turns. And tonight, folks, hold on to your seats. You guys are not going to believe this. I've reached out to this person's talent agent. They gave me the express permission to be able to have them on the show. And it is just going to be phenomenal. So I want you to welcome tonight with me, Mr. John Taylor. John, how are you?
Great. It's a privilege to be here.
It is good to have. It looks like something's missing, man. Is your top lip? Is it cold?
Yeah, a little bit. We had to raise some money for a church function, and my boss, who is also my daughter, had me shave it off for charity. So it can grow back in eventually, but everybody keeps telling me I look younger without it.
So you know what that means? Me, you, and you know who we're gonna have to get in touch with Tim. And you know what we should do? We should try and see who could grow the best beard for No Shave November.
There you go. That might be
that might be interesting.
Right.
So again, thank you for joining me tonight. And folks, for those that don't know, John Taylor is from Coleman Taylor Funeral Home out in Cecil, PA. So if you see my morning coffee conversations and you see my Tumblr from Coleman Taylor, this is Coleman Taylor Funeral Services. And John's official title is, I believe he works for Caitlin.
I do. I'm Caitlin's dad.
So Caitlin is you've seen her on social media on Facebook and things like that. Coleman Taylor Funeral Services, and I'm sure she'll jump in the comments as she can. She normally does. Right. So, John, let's go ahead and let's welcome to the show Mr. Duane Hills. Duane, thank you for being here with us this evening. Thank you for taking the time.
Yeah, thank you for asking the invite.
I'm extremely excited. So I know that. So you were the president of Joseph Gullers and Son. Was it 12 years?
12 years, yeah, a little over 12, but yes, 12 years is what I tell people. Yep.
And now I know there's normally when you do the presentations at seminars and all, you do give a little bit of an addendum to the fact of the funeral home of the president. But I think it's all.
I mean, they acquired that title over the years. But I always tell everyone, that if it was just the funeral home of the presidents, we would have been out of business years and years ago.
Absolutely.
So it's a little hyped up, the title.
Hype is good.
It is. Yeah. It is. And I mean, just you think of the name Gullers and you automatically think of just prestige, the creme de la, you equate it to like the Ritz Carlton of funeral service. And the facilities are immaculate. And now you retired shortly after the remodel, correct?
Well, I retired in 2024. The remodel actually was finished at the end of 2019. But then when the
Oh,
pandemic struck, I mean, we couldn't even use the facility, effectively for quite some time. So we couldn't even show it off, But yeah, we had an open house. I believe it was in October of 2019, and then shortly into 2020, the doors were shut pretty much.
mm, that's sad because I mean that the building is absolutely gorgeous. I remember when I was in mortuary school and I had to write a paper on a high profile funeral. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to send Duane Hills a message on Facebook and ask him. And you invited me out to the funeral home, and this is prior to the remodel. And you were gracious enough to give me a tour, and then really sit down with me. And I think we went over. It was J. Edgar Hoover's funeral, and that's what I wrote the paper on. And just looking at the details back then, how meticulous that they were for that service, I can only imagine how more in depth and more detailed, a state funeral would be nowadays.
Yeah, a state funeral these days comes with a plan that has been written, sometimes years before, practiced 4 times a year, like full dress rehearsals in Washington. So yeah, there's a whole lot more involved. Back, like the say J. Edgar Hoover, when that call came in, they basically, just like we would any call, from start to finish, you ran it. You figured it out as you went along. But with state funerals, or I'm going to say high profile funerals these days, they're more apt to be planned in advance, right down to the, where everyone's going to be staying in the hotels, and, what kind of vehicles do we need, and that sort of thing. It's very detailed. I've seen, plans that show photographs of the lineup of the cars, and at what time does this car move to here and there. It's almost like insane.
So it is meticulously choreographed
Yeah,
down to like the minute.
absolutely. Yeah.
Wow, okay.
In some cases, it really is. And a lot of times with a high profile, if we were into that, where we're going to have, they say 10 to 16 vehicles or something, we would literally have a person or two working the laptops with a car manifest. And anytime a phone call came in to like, oh, we decided we're going to be over here, it was a constant moving target to try and get it where we knew what time we had to pick up who at what place, to have them at a staging area, for the actual service and all. So it really came down to one or two people just dedicating their entire time to keeping the car manifest alive.
And then we spoke a little bit briefly about this. So the team at Gullers is, I mean, you have a large team, but it's fairly small for the scale of services of a state funeral. So there are other parts and other bodies and companies that are involved outside, correct?
Correct. In the SCI world, they have a smaller company called LHT, and they basically are the ones that help write the plans these days. And then when the death actually occurs, or they also manage the practice events that I was referring to.
Yeah.
But when the actuality of the death occurs, all of a sudden, multiple people descend on Gullers. We set up a war room upstairs, and literally, with their help, sometimes we may have 12, 16 extra people brought in from around the Washington area as well, other funeral homes, but some are definitely from out of state that have participated in several of the higher profile funerals down through the years.
Yeah, because I would assume that they're probably pulling managers from other locations that have have the seniority, have the rank that can support and help and things like that. They're not just calling in the part time guy that works the parking lot on Saturday evenings to say, hey, we need you to come help out on so and so service type of situation.
Well, when I first got my feet wet in all this, on the real high profile, when there was a first lady that passed away, and I had just started there. It's like, hey, do you need my help? I volunteered myself, and they said, get on a plane, and head here. So,
Wow.
Yeah, that was really cool. And that really gave me the real first hands-on experience of being in that setting.
So let's talk about that for a second. So you started your career, because let's see, if memory serves me correctly, 48 years licensed.
I became actually licensed in 79. But if you put in the apprenticeship and all that and the schooling, I've been involved in the industry for like 48 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you started back where you now reside in upstate New York, and then you were working for you were managing some other smaller firms.
Well, I had 2 firms of my own, and
Okay.
And then I sold them and went into managing. I had a cluster of 4 firms in the New York State, and then I ended up with Western New York. So if you drew a line from Syracuse down to the Pennsylvania border, I had everything west of that all the way to Buffalo. And then when Alderwoods came along, I was still in a management position, but then eventually I moved back to the Corning, Elmira area, where I had the 4 locations because they were going to restructure. And I said, hey, I to be honest with you, I was missing funeral directing because I was always on the road in between these locations. And I just, and then a family would ask for me, back home. And it's like, well, he's not available. And I hated that. So they let me come back to my 4, but then SCI eventually acquired Alderwoods, as we know.
Right.
And then they started, divesting some of these smaller locations. And then they asked me, like, would you transfer? I said, well, I would consider it. And they said, where would you like to go? I said, someplace warmer. So they gave me an option. They flew me to Richmond, Virginia, showed me several locations in that area. And then they said, would you go out to Texas? We have a whole bunch of locations. And I said, yeah, I'll do that. So they flew me out to Texas. For about 3 days, we drove around like a dozen different locations. And the last one before I headed to the airport was in Lufkin, Texas. And it was a little cluster of 3 funeral homes and a cemetery. And when I got back to New York, they called and they offered me that position or the one in Richmond. And I thought, if I'm going to make a move, it's a major move, I'm going to go on an adventure.
There you go.
I said, let's go to Texas. So great experience. I was there 4.5 years. And while I was there was a very famous congressman from Texas that passed away suddenly. And I worked with the family. And then eventually we brought him back to Arlington National Cemetery. And I'll never forget because I got picked up at the hotel. I flew back with the family. I got picked up at the hotel that morning. And when I got to Gallers, my first time ever in the door, they said Alexander Haig had died the night before. And a whole bunch of people are upstairs, like planning on what was going to happen and all. I love American history. Okay. I absorb American history. So I thought, wow. And I went back to Texas and I thought, how does somebody get a job at Gallers? Seriously. And I don't know, a year or so went by. And then one of my sales managers, she was having a meeting and talking about goals for the year and all. And said, write down 10 goals, but pick one that you're absolutely going to achieve. List all the action steps. And I went back to my house and I wrote on a little piece of paper, within a year, I'm going to have a position at Joseph Gallers. I stuck it in my pencil drawer. 1 week shy of a year, I was walking in as the assistant manager.
Really?
At Gallers. And then in 4 months' time, the president left. And I thought, wow, I haven't even learned the geography yet, but who's going to be my new manager? I hope it's going to be me. So I asked if I could, apply for that, and they said yes. So I did. I interviewed. I went through a grueling 2.5-hour interview. A guy flew in from Houston, and I don't know. It took 2 or 3 weeks before I was notified that I had the position if I wanted it. So that's how I got to Dolphins initially.
Now, how old were you when you started there initially as the assistant manager?
I'm going to say this is going to give away my age, isn't it? I'm thinking I was about 48 or 9, somewhere along in there.
And then the reason I ask is because, like I said, last year I had the opportunity to go and tour and have dinner with the staff and the team there. The lady that works the door, she was just phenomenal. She was so sweet. And I was just really surprised that I looking at the directors and the new manager or president, I don't know if that's the same title they have now, but I want to say he was probably late 30s, mid 30s at most.
Yeah, I think so.
And I was just really surprised. But then after talking with them, and the you could just tell the level of sincerity and commitment they have to not only the profession, but to the name that they're representing.
Right.
I was really taken back by that. Their professionalism was nonstop.
I used to, when I spoke to some we'd have some younger people working the doors and things or helping. And I would say to them, if you really stopped and thought about where you work.
Yeah.
I seriously, it's like, I wanted them to understand the opportunity that they had for being there.
Yeah.
And not out of arrogance or anything like that. It's just, this is pretty high up the ladder as far as opportunities might be, and you never know where it can lead you to, down the road either. So it's just, yeah, it is a much younger staff these days. It's kind of interesting because the Gullers themselves, the family was 4 generations,
right?
4 different generations of the Guller family that were presidents of the firm. Joe Hagan he was there a number of years. I actually hold the second longest tenure after Joe Hagan, and I was the 10th president of Joseph Gullers. I'm very proud of that, humbled at the same time. But we figured that up one day. Sometimes people in that position don't last very long there. And
that's the thing. I believe that a lot of times when people move on, that it's a great opportunity there. And then you never know who you run into, and
Yep.
it leads to the next step in your career. And like yourself, they might have moved to another location because they moved up the chain and maybe have the opportunity in the future to come back as.
Or that looks really good on their resume too,
I'm sure people try to, and I'm sure you saw that over your tenure, Duane, that folks were just trying to get in and be able to put that just simply on the resume, just to build their resume.
Yeah.
Which there's nothing wrong with that as long as the intention is true right from the beginning. But it's to understand that, yeah, we would still want somebody that is fully committed, not just here to put a name as a line space.
Well, that's just it. And, and you may relate to this as well, Chris, but to bring someone into the DC market, let's say the DC, Maryland, Virginia, Northern Virginia market, that's an expensive place to live.
It is.
And, I think we paid really well, but the biggest downfall was if they couldn't afford to live in the immediate area, they had a commute.
Yeah.
And toward the end, I lived 8 miles from the funeral home. I had bought a home in Silver Spring, Maryland. It was an hour each way.
Traffic.
On good days.
Yeah.
Okay. So they either get discouraged because they can't, they have to live out of ways in order really to have any kind of a life. The only thing I will say, we were always very good about, they weren't necessarily on call to go on a first call.
Right.
They might have phones to navigate things, but because it would be almost impossible to travel in and out, because of the timeline of it. So that was the hardest part about really hiring someone, was the cost of living.
in that area. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, it
I
was.
mean, because I mean, the average home, you're talking upwards, almost $1 million homes down in that neck of the woods.
When I was there, to get I don't know, say 1,000 square foot apartment was close to $4,000
Phew.
anywhere in the area around the funeral home. So, and you take a young person just getting out of mortuary school, and
Yeah.
it's like that's pretty high cost of living for something
I
like
had a
that.
friend who lived in Arlington. I think he added a 1 bedroom onto his house, and it was over $100,000.
Yeah. And then we were situated in Northwest DC, which that in Potomac, Maryland, Bethesda, like Montgomery County, Maryland, I think is one of the highest, most expensive counties in the United States to live in.
It absolutely is.
So we had a lot of that going against us, but
So somebody put a question in, and Douglas asked, "Was Gullers involved with Senator Graham's services?" And I
can
believe
listen.
they were.
Yes, absolutely.
And then
Yeah.
that now understanding, and even the firm back home was also an SCI firm as well
Mhm.
that handled everything back where interment took place. But normally, once anything comes into DC on that level, now could a senator choose not to use Gullers, Dwayne, if
Oh,
they
absolutely.
weren't?
Absolutely. There's no real commitment on that. I will tell you that, um, especially if they're going to go to the Capitol Rotunda, typically that involves the military district of Washington. And they basically are in charge of that whole scene. So Gullers has had a long-standing relationship with the District of Washington. And so I would be surprised, but there was a Supreme Court justice that passed away while I was there that did not use Gullers, and that was a shock because Gullers has had probably 40 some Supreme Court justices down through the years.
Wow.
I wrote about a chapter in my book, but there were reasons behind that. I found out later that the son was a Catholic priest and had a great association with the funeral home in Northern Virginia. So, I mean, it made sense once I knew that. It's,
Right.
you can't bury everyone, right? I mean, that's so. But I will tell you, I went to watch the service because I wanted to observe my competition.
That's
sat in the
the
back
director
pew.
in all of us.
Yeah, I sat in the back pew and watched the whole thing unfold. Of course, I wasn't critical out openly, but I shared a few things with my staff that we wouldn't have done. But that's everyone does things a little differently. So
Yeah, I mean, I
yeah,
think one of the like moments that stick out in my mind of, high notoriety services was First Lady Barbara Bush at the museum in Texas. How off-centered the casket was on the beer
yeah.
for that service. I remember that,
Let's,
and it's
let's,
just like,
let's talk about that for a minute.
please.
Because so was Nancy Reagan's, and so was President Reagan's casket.
Okay.
All right, so we actually corrected that. Those situations are usually military pallbearers.
Right.
And I will tell you that gets practiced in advance. When somebody like that dies for 2 or 3 days before they might arrive at that venue, there's practices going on every day there, okay? Dress rehearsals. And when they would get up to the beer, they couldn't see the beer to set it down.
Okay.
But they never wanted to have like the 2 funeral directors on either end to guide it. So there's a company called Adcraft out in Kansas or Missouri somewhere. And we had a beer built that was 1 inch longer and 1 inch wider on each side to use like at the National Cathedral. Now they can come up and they can literally eyeball the edge and set it down properly.
Okay.
It's, and it's not like they didn't practice. It was just a very difficult move. And then consider, those guys when they're doing that, the eyes of the nation are on them.
Oh, absolutely.
You talk about stress or being nervous. You see some of those guys, sometimes the water just running right off their faces. And I don't know whether it's stress, nerves, or their uniform. You know what I mean? And so it's
Well,
so
middle of
that was
July, walking up all those stairs at the United States
yeah, I mean, we
Capitol,
took
and I
corrective
mean,
action on that because we saw that as a continuing problem going on and on. It's like, how do we get this where we can line that up? And because we always take the criticism on social media and all that, and I get that. It's like, well, no way around it. So,
well, I think
I
I
just
posted it the
try to
other night.
defend it honestly where I can.
Yeah, I think I posted it the other night. I got home and I had a service that day, and I had dinner and grabbed a little bit of ice cream, and I sit down and I posted a picture. I'm like, what do funeral directors do in the evening? They eat their ice cream and they watch I was watching Senator Graham's service.
Yeah.
And it's just like I'm like, I wonder, I'm looking to see, okay, who do I know? Do I know? Okay, yep, I know
Yeah.
him, that type of thing.
It's really hard sometimes when you get in like the National Cathedral and there's a few thousand people and you see them out of their element. They're not sitting talking to Jake Tapper or something on the news, and sometimes it's really hard to pick out. I had an experience once where I was standing visitation at the door and this guy comes bounding through the front door and he heads upstairs up our spiral staircase. And I thought, oh my God, who was that? You just sit there the whole time he's upstairs. I'm trying to figure out who he is. He comes back down the stairs and I looked at him. He looked straight at me and all of a sudden it clicked. It was Oliver North. Like, I know who this guy is.
But it's one of those things that, again, it's like you said, you explained to the team, it's like, do you realize where you're working? You're living history.
Yeah, it is. It's
every day.
History. That was the calling card for me.
Now, Joseph Guller started the funeral home at 21.
Yeah, in 1850.
And so 1850, and he was just a cabinet maker.
Correct. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Now, where did the real connection and the drive go, or how did it generate? Because we know the stories of Frankie Campbell, how Frank would go out to dinner and have someone call and page his name so people would hear his name and things like that. What gave Gullers the jump start to become Gullers?
Well, I'm going to go back in time a little bit. First of all, in I think it was 1861 when Lincoln came into the office, was inaugurated. Stephen Douglas, who he had debated out in Illinois, a very famous congressman, died. And I found some documents where Gullers literally were hired by the White House to drape the black mourning cloth all over the White House for Stephen Douglas. And then I noticed that they hired them several times to come and hang war maps in the war room and things. So, they they were literally a block from the White House. But their real first break as far as like a presidential funeral, that was Woodrow Wilson. I believe it was 1924. But I've thought about this, but Mrs. Wilson, who was the second Mrs. Wilson, she had been a Galt. And in Washington, D.C., there was a jewelry store, Galt's Jewelers. And looking back through all the records, every time Gullers had a little silver plaque engraved to put on top of the caskets back then, it came from Galt's.
The relationship.
They had built a relationship. And when her husband died, when Woodrow Wilson died, she called Gullers. And, and a little bit prior to that, they had buried Admiral George Dewey, the savior of Manila Bay. I have this historic list of notables. When I came to Gullers, it was 1 page long. Okay. It's 40 pages now. I literally went back through the files, and no pun intended, but I dug up files. I dug up files on people. Every once in a while, I would think, okay, if we buried President Taft, did we bury his wife, the first lady?
True.
So I Googled when did she die, and then I would head to the file. We had a place called the Penthouse on the roof. It was a small building up there that housed all the files, and it would be like a eureka moment. I'd pull out Mrs. Taft's file. Literally, and even in writing the book. I have to say, the Gaulers, when we did the remodel and I had this little museum room built,
Oh, that's fantastic, by the
I had,
way.
I had been looking and collecting for anything I could get my hands on that related to Gaulers and high profile funerals and whatnot. And so I met some of the Gaulers, like the fifth and sixth generation Gaulers. The oldest one, he's in his 90s. He lives in Jacksonville, Florida. And I went down and interviewed him for the book and all that. But he gave me boxes of documents and photographs and that they had kept when they sold the place.
Right.
So I had this treasure trove, and then tossed in all the files upstairs in the penthouse, along with the digital Evening Star and Washington Post. And I had my email, I had my documentation and stuff to start to write this book. And
Now,
it was a treasure trove.
I just can't imagine. Like I probably would never get any work done because I would be just up there just like looking, like wanting to dig into the history of everything. That's amazing. I don't know how you were disciplined enough to actually run the business.
Well, it was called COVID.
Okay.
I literally wrote this book evenings during COVID when you couldn't go out to dinner or we weren't having visitations.
True.
That's when I wrote this book. Yep.
Now, how long did it take you to write? Oh, go ahead, John.
I say one of the interesting things that he just said was about knowing people before you need them.
Yep.
And that's kind of what you're doing, Chris, with this whole program is, to get to know people and get them to know you before they need you. And just the symbol of the engraving of nameplates, you got to know someone and, who are we going to call? Yep.
We're all about networking. Yeah.
Networking, building relationships. If the first time the family meets the funeral director is when they walk through the door to make arrangements, you as the funeral director have already let the family down. We need to be out there. We need to be in the community. And that's one thing I can say. Even Gullers has been very involved in events throughout the DC area. That you guys sponsored numerous events throughout the year, participated in all the parades and things like that, which boggles my mind, by the way, because I didn't know till last year. Apparently, there are no funeral processions in the District of Columbia.
Not
legally.
Well, if you're a dignitary, okay,
yeah,
then you have either the Metro Police. If it's somebody from the administration, you have the Secret Service. If it's from the Supreme Court, you have the Supreme Court Police. If we're going down Rock Creek Park, we can get the Park Police. There's so many levels of security of law enforcement in DC. Just depending on what your role is as an official. Then yes, I mean I literally drove a sitting senator from Gaulers. They came there and swept my vehicle, put a dog up in the back of the hearse. Make sure I wasn't taking a load of explosives to the Capitol. And they came there with SUVs and motorcycles. And the guy told me, he says, stay right behind that SUV right there. And if we go, wherever that vehicle goes, you follow it. Don't hesitate. We left Gaulers and never stopped once to the Capitol Plaza. And the guy riding with me, and it was at lunchtime. I said, sit up straight in your seat. I said, you're getting your picture taken today, because people were out snapping pictures. But we did. We were there in no time. Oh. They were just, those motorcycles, they just pushed the people right up onto the sidewalk almost. I just like, oh my goodness, and they make enough noise when they're coming. Everyone, if you live in DC, there's a different sound for a motorcade.
Oh yeah. It's literally like rolling thunder.
Yeah, when you hear it, here comes either the president or the vice president, or this is a motorcade. Somebody important's coming through, So yeah, but we never stopped once. It was amazing. But yeah, anytime we would go, let's say to the National Cathedral, if there was going to be somebody from the administration there, they would come to the funeral home. The dogs would sniff all the cars. They would pat us down. They would lead us to wherever we were going. We couldn't just go on our leisure. So,
But that's what I say. It's not like, I think it's not like, we're the funeral director. We just show up at church at 11 o'clock and we wait for, the priest to start ringing the bell or the whatever. And then we bring the casket in. I mean, you can't just roll up to the National Cathedral for a funeral.
No. And there again, there was one time when I stood my ground, though. I was just frustrated. It was a church in Georgetown, a Catholic church, and a former president was going to be eulogizing the congressman that had passed. And that particular church, there was an older church right around the corner from it where they originally started from. But I went over there and the family was greeted by all the dignitaries that were coming. And then I walked the widow and the former president and his wife through a little courtyard area and then to the back of the church. Anyways, we go through this whole service. We're in Georgetown. And literally, when the service was over, the former president and his wife came out, stood at the back of the hearse, and then 100 people just gathered around them trying to shake their hands and all, because they're very personable. And I went over and I stood next to the first SUV because I was driving the widow. Okay.
Right.
And this Secret Service guy comes over and says, "Get on the sidewalk." I said, "Sir, I'm with the funeral home. This is my duty here is this vehicle to drive Mrs. So-and-so back to the reception." He says, "I'm telling you right now, you get on the sidewalk." And I said, "I'm the reason we can be here today." I said, "I have the license that makes this all legal." And I thought, you might better be spending your time watching the former president and his wife with 100 people that are circling them than me standing with a pianon from the funeral home next to my SUV. So he said, "Oh, I'm sorry. I understand now." And I just thought, this is crazy. Everybody wants to be in charge,
So, I mean,
he just rattled me. That's all.
Well, and that's got to happen a lot because there's got to be, like you said, you have the Secret Service, you have, the alphabet soup of agencies that probably are dictating this and dictating that, who's going to be in charge here, who's going to be in charge there. Now, at what point does whoever the point person, whether it be LHT or someone from Gullers, just say, "Okay, this is our role, this is our lane, we're going to stay in it, and we know it."
All right. The military district of Washington pretty much knows our role. Okay.
Right.
They depend on us because we knew our business, and with all the practicing that we did, there was a president that passed away right after I retired. I practiced his funeral for 12 years, 4 times a year. And then I retired, he dies. But anyways, they
call you back.
Yeah, they know that we know the role. We always said we bring the toys to those practices. Okay. You guys are the military piece. So what I will say is, like at the cathedral, if a former president's going to be there or a current president, the Secret Service is the ultimate in charge. Okay. And then it trickles on down to all, like the cathedral has their own police force. But in the case of like somebody from the administration, then it's the Secret Service is in charge. And we don't abide by that. We have to be vetted to be there. We have a badge on that says where we can be. You can either be in the building or you can have one that encompasses the whole area of the cathedral, outdoors and indoors. But we all go through the magnometer. I mean, it's, but they know us, Hey, hi, Duane. I mean? It's like you reach that level. And then we always went to the cathedral a day or two ahead of time and said, "Okay, let's walk through this," because, each family may have had different requests. And we never just assumed that we know what we're doing. We wanted to go in there and work with the folks from the cathedral because they have a huge staff to pull off one of these funerals. And, we wanted them to realize we're in your building now. You tell us how you want us to do this and we will make it happen. So, yeah.
So even like traditional or lay funeral service here, what we'll refer to it as, even when we show up, I can speak for myself. When I show up to a church, as soon as I pull up, I always let the family know. I say, "Look, I'm a guest in this priest and this pastor's house. They're going to lay down how they want things to be done. Hopefully, it's in consultation with you guys. But again, I'm just here to make it legal."
Yeah, and we were in that Holy Trinity Church in Georgetown one other time, and we were doing a dress rehearsal. and the military was there, and they couldn't figure out, like, once they lifted the casket up to carry it down front, set it on something, what happens to the church truck? And they're like, oh, and these military guys are, oh, finally the priest says, stop. He says, ask the guys from Gallers. They do this every day. They're going to take care of that church truck. Stop fretting over it. So it's just like, I'm thinking, okay, how many funerals have you done, sir?
Yeah, it's one of those keep it simple, stupid methods. You know what I mean?
It's just, but you get that. It's always excitable. People are, the emotions are running high as far as like, I'm in charge of this or that, or I can't believe I'm here doing this. I think my biggest wow moment, we were doing a service in a Methodist church in DC, and I knew I was going to have this. I actually knew the names ahead of time, but who were going to be the pallbearers and the active and honorary. And I was going to meet them in the library of the church to give them instructions. So I go over, and as I'm going over, General Petraeus is coming down through, and he says, hey, can you show me the restroom? So I walked into the restroom. I go into this room, and here sits Henry Kissinger, Madeleine Albright, Dick Cheney, Mitt Romney, Colin Powell, to mention a few.
I was going to say, did you make a wrong turn?
I'm just standing there, and I'm thinking, okay, I'm this
war room.
Yeah, I'm this kid from East Lawrence, Pennsylvania. Okay, what am I doing here? And the comical thing is, to my mind, when Henry Kissinger, when he did pass at age 100, I thought, when I was in high school in the 70s, I thought he was 100. He was around for a long time, was he not? I mean, what a long life. But I just remember that day thinking, and then before, it was through several people in that lineup that I just read off to you.
Yeah.
I worked their funerals within the next few years after that. It's just, I don't know. It's bizarre to interact with it.
How often now do you ever just sit back, Duane, and just sit there and really think, like you said to your team, do you realize that the history that you've been able to live and be part of, and really, like, when looking at everything behind you, you can tell you definitely value and cherish history, but it's like that you lived that, you participated in that.
I know it's even to this day, it's a little surreal, I will have to say. I mean, I made some really good connections with, people that gave me their cell numbers.
Yeah.
It's like, not that I would just randomly call them, but, like, hey, Duane, would it be easier if I just gave you my cell number and we could communicate that way instead of going through several levels, So, yeah, it's, I don't know. It's, and I, through all of it too, and I say this in all sincerity, I'm still very humbled by the fact that I was even there, that I had a footprint there.
Yeah.
And, and it was difficult to leave. I'll tell you, just to know what comes after me. Is somebody going to preserve that little museum room that I poured my heart into, or, and as these two older Galler gentlemen, I mean, they're not going to be around forever, and I stay in touch with them. But it's going to be a sad day to me when something happens to them, and then. Even like my book, I don't know if you know the story behind that, but when we were getting ready to have our open house after our remodel project, the gentleman from Southern Calls magazine, Mike, he had a lady named Alice Adams from Austin, Texas, interviewed me for an article, and they came and photographed everything, and she wrote up this really nice article and all. But when we got through with the interview, she says, Duane, she says, there's a story to be told there. She says, you're sitting on a powder keg of history. And she says, I want to write a book with you. I said, Alice, I don't know anything about writing a book. She said, I'm going to walk you right through it. We're going to write this together. And then, we procrastinated a little bit, and then the pandemic hit. And finally, she just kept at me, and we started it. And, I had to learn how to use Google Documents. Oh my God, what a nightmare that was! But we would share the documents back and forth. I'd write a chapter, she'd review it. She gave me lots of great pointers. She'd rework my paragraph here or there sometimes. And so we had a great collaboration. But and then she kept after me about a second book when we got the first. I said, when we finished the first one, I said, Alice, this book's going to get so heavy, nobody's even going to want to lift it to read it. So
Pretty heavy.
I said, we got to draw a line here and literally get this thing printed. So, and then when we were ready to print it, coming, during the pandemic, there's a paper shortage. So I had to wait like 3 or 4 months for them to find enough paper to print the book.
Oh, man.
But I will tell you, the day they arrived, and when I took a box of them, sat it on my countertop and opened it up, and I think I probably shed a tear or two.
Absolutely.
It's just amazing to
Who helps
hold
you
it.
box, because these books are pretty heavy.
Yes, 3 pounds, 2 ounces. But
And it's because it's about what 500 and some pages.
yeah, the reason it's so heavy is because of that paper issue.
Yeah,
Because that was the only paper they could come up with. So,
But that makes, for a book buff, that makes it that much better. It's quality paper. It feels good.
yeah.
It's like people that read a newspaper, they like feeling the paper between their fingers, but that's quality paper in that book. And it makes
And another thing, I wanted it to be first class too. So then you may not have noticed this, but I had it also
yes.
on the spine and everything.
Right.
And it had to be first class coming from where I was bringing it from. So it was a cool experience, but it took a long time, 2.5 years. I think you started to ask me that question.
I was going to ask how long.
2.5 years of writing back and forth. And just recently, sad to say that Alice passed away on the 13th of June. Yeah,
Well, your next book will only take 6 months with AI.
yeah, I know. I'm going to tell you something interesting about that, because I just started experimenting with that recently. And I put in there, because I had another idea for a book writing about people that literally have died within the walls of the White House.
Mm.
And there's been a few.
Yeah.
So I asked ChatGPT or whatever that is, I said, can you give me a list of all the people that died in the White House? Boom, up pops this list. And then they say, would you like us to write an opening paragraph for that? And I said, well, sure, just go ahead. So they start saying to me, well, based on the fact that you wrote 1 block west of the White House, we can see why you're interested in this subject. I didn't tell them that. It's a little scary, actually. They know a little more than maybe you would want them to.
You're dealing with the government.
Mercy. But anyways, that was interesting how quickly they tabulated that information that I asked them for.
It is amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't even understand it. I never will. But anyways, and then when we finished that book, she says, "You ready to write the next book?" And I said, "Well, not really." She said, "Well, we're going to write another book." But I will have to say that in writing the first one, we gathered up information. I thought, I had a stack of, I want to write about General Phil Sheridan's funeral, or I had great information about J. Edgar Hoover's funeral. And so I thought, well, that's not in the first book. But I'll tell you what I did. I stopped at 1970 when SCI bought Gallers, because I didn't want to get myself in a situation where I wrote a book about the history of the firm that they bought.
Right.
So, and I'm not quite sure. I think I need legal counsel to know whether or not I can go past 1970. But I did with that J. Edgar Hoover, but we kind of made it not so much. Yeah, not so much a Galler's funeral, but that was a story that had to be told too. I mean, from a historian's standpoint, it's very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, so let's chat about that for a second. So, for those that are not in the funeral profession that are watching, SCI stands for Service Corporation International. They are a corporation that owns smaller funeral homes or premier funeral homes such as Joseph Guller and Son. Lewis out in Texas, Frankie Campbell out in New York, and there's a couple other ones. But now, Duane, when he was writing this book, was employed by them. Now, Dwayne, did you have to send that up through your employer for approval? And did it get to Mr. Waltrip at the time? I know he passed away.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a second. When I first embarked on the project, I spoke to my market leadership, and he said, "Yeah, that's fine. I don't see any problem with that." I said, "Okay, thank you." So then I wrote the book, sent it off to get printed, and then there was a middle management person all of a sudden that emerged and says, "Legal wants to see your manuscript." And that's when I came up with it. I said, "Well, I wrote a history about a firm before you purchased it, before our company purchased it."
Right.
Well, trust but verify. So I played hardball for about 2 or 3 weeks. And I finally thought, there's nothing wrong with what I wrote. So I sent it to him.
Right.
And I thought, happy reading. So I can't remember whether it was a week or two. And I got an email back from the legal. They sent it supposedly clear to the top of the legal, the ivory tower in Houston. And they gave me permission to publish the book. So, of course, I made a copy of that email. But then eventually, what was interesting was once I received the books, and I didn't send it to him, but Mr. Waltrip ended up with a copy of my book. And he read it. And he wrote me this glowing letter about how, he says, first of all, he says, the amount of research you did in this is amazing. And when I did the deal, be back?
Yeah, there you are.
Okay. And so I saved that letter too, believe me. And then he passed shortly thereafter. But I thought, okay, so for the people that were trying to shut me down, let's say, hypothetically, I got the ultimate endorsement from Bob Waltrip.
Pretty much. I put that in the forward of the next book.
Yeah, and I will tell you, that these two older gentlemen in the Galler family, they adopted me. Okay, I wrote a history about their family and their family business.
Right.
Who gets that, right?
And you represented it very, very professionally and very nicely as well.
Well, it was just, he asked me when I went to Jacksonville and interviewed Bill Galler. His father was the last generation to own the businesses. And he was this guy was a retired Air Force colonel. And they were all pilots. They all loved that fly. The other one, there's one in Gaithersburg now. He's no longer flying, but he's in his late 80s. But for some reason, the Gallers loved airplanes. And so I went down there and he says, he says, my grandmother her nickname was Till, T-I-L, Galler. And she was Monk Galler's wife. It was my grandmother. She played such a role behind the scenes and all that in our family. Would you write a chapter about my grandmother? I said, and he just gave me tons of information. And, it was a pleasure.
Yeah.
No, they were interested. When we did our open house, first of all, let me say, when I first came to Galler's, I was told there were no Gallers living. The family was extinct. Well, and then one day I'm doing visitation and I feel this guy tugging on my coat sleeve and he says, "Hey, Duane, I'm Bob Galler." I was like, "Well, hello there." There's Gallers all over the country. Okay. I don't know where that story came from. But anyways, when we did our open house and we had our museum room, that was unveiling of all that, I got enough information from all of them. We had 40 Gallers from around the United States attended that open house. And I made it all about them.
Yeah. And
we went down. One of them lived in Minnesota. Her husband had died a couple years before that. And he was cremated out in Minnesota. And in talking with her daughter, I found out that they had a beautiful portrait of Joseph Galler and a mantelpiece mirror. And they were willing to give it to us for this museum room. So they shipped it, and it was beautiful. I mean, if you saw that portrait, you'd think Mr. Galler could speak to you. And so I said, well, I hope your mom can come to this, our open house and all. And she said, well, she doesn't really like to fly. She says, but maybe if I convince her, I'll go out there and fly with her. So, and I said, well, she wanted to bury her husband's ashes on the Galler plot in Oak Hill Cemetery in Georgetown. I said,
Okay.
if you can get her to come, you bring that, and then we'll have a service the day before, the Saturday right before the open house on Sunday, and we'll have a service there. So I arranged the whole thing. She came. The other side of the family finds out they're going to do that, and they say, "Do you think she would mind if we were there?" I said, "Let me check." So no, that'd be fine. They didn't even know each other.
Yeah.
Their husbands or their father-in-laws were in business together. But anyways, we gathered there in October. It was the most beautiful day you ever saw. We're standing at the Galler plot, and these two families, some of them were meeting each other for the first time. And they decided after that they were going to stay together as a family.
Oh,
And then we went off and had a wonderful breakfast the next morning. But we did. We made it all about them. I got a great picture of them all sitting up in front of the chapel. And there was something I was going to say I was leading up to. Oh, his ashes were in a cigar box made by Mr. Galler, Joseph Galler.
Oh, wow.
That he had passed down through the family, and he wanted his ashes in there. So, or I guess it was a jewelry box to say, but it looked like, the size of a. So the day of the open house, his widow comes up to me. She says, "I have something out in the vehicle I'd like to give you if you want it." Well, it was the tray in the top of the jewelry box because it wouldn't fit with all the ashes in there. So I thought maybe you'd like to have that on your desk. I have this little dovetailed jeweler's tray that goes in that box. It was actually made by Joseph Galler. So,
and that, talk about that's stuff you just can't ever go. You can't, like, how do you beat that?
I don't know. It's just they were a wonderful family.
Your love of history is what brought that family together.
Yeah, I know.
I
say that humbly once again.
But funerals, that's when families meet.
Yeah.
I know.
And to have something of a prize like that for them to give you as a thank you. And sometimes I always say that next to the paycheck, the best thing is a hug at the end of a funeral, that they think you did that well of a job.
I love it when they call you by your first name at the end,
Mm-hmm.
So Duane, folks are asking if the book can be bought on Amazon. I don't believe so.
No, you have to order it. I used to have a website, but after the initial first 2 years or more, it was hard to just maintain it and keep it up there. So if people want to email me at my email,
and I'll pin it back because we've shared it out recently.
And there were several people that have since you announced I was going to be speaking, and I believe they already have their books. So I send it out media mail. It goes really pretty quick that way. That's still first class mail, and they can drop a check in the mail. I mean, it is available. And then there is a second one if anybody wants more information on that one.
I actually want to, after the show, I'll get in touch with you because I want Saints and Sinners.
Yeah,
because that sounds like a continuation of more of the nitty gritty funeral stuff in Washington.
It is. Yeah, it is.
Well, we kind of jumped from the very beginning of a Gallers to present day, but as they come up, and I think Chris alluded to that earlier, that how did they get into funeral business? That they were cabinet makers. A lot of people don't know that, how that progression went, and I'll leave that to you. I mean, I'm a former cabinet maker, so I kind of know about some of that.
Yeah, well, it kind of goes all the way back when Joseph Galler, when his family immigrated here from England, they came over in, I think it was 1832, if I remember correctly. Within about 2 years, Joseph was just a little boy at the time, maybe like 4 years old. Both his parents died, and it was interesting because the family lore was that they died aboard ship and were buried at sea. That is not true.
Oh, wow.
I found that they were initially buried in Alexandria, Virginia, and then Joseph, in later years, had them moved to his plot in Oak Hill Cemetery in Georgetown. But anyways, that being said, he was orphaned, and he went to live with a family that the father was a cabinet maker. Okay, so he eventually, apprenticed under this gentleman, And he also went on to marry their daughter, who was 2 years younger than he was when he moved in with them. Family didn't know that either. That was these moments of discovery were very cool. So, and it was so exciting to share this information with them. But so then it was odd too, because right there on Pennsylvania Avenue, he bought a 2-story house at age 21. He ended up having like 10 children, and like 4 or 5 of them didn't live to be, out of their young years. But his sister also was married to a cabinet maker that had his shop right next door to Joseph's. So I guess you would say they were competition. I never got too much out of that side of the story, but well, anyways, he started also building coffins, that they were called at the time. And if you visit the museum at Gawler's, we have a little model that Joseph Gawler made for the U.S. Patent Office. And it has the original label and dates and everything. It was from 1869, I believe. And then when I met the Gawlers, they had the original paper patent for that exact model.
Wow.
So the model sits in a showcase, the patent hangs above it. It's unbelievable that those two pieces came back together again. But yeah, he started doing that, and then his 2 oldest sons joined him in business. But so that was in 1850. In 1870, they moved across the street, and the building that they moved into, which actually they tore down and built a 3-story modern funeral home. But that building had been the headquarters of Winfield Scott, the general, the famous, he was the head of the Union Army at the beginning of the Civil War, and that was his headquarters. So that building was torn down. They put up a 3-story, and they literally, that's when they started pulling families, the services out of the home somewhat and back into a funeral home. They had a chapel there. They had a prep room. They also continued to make caskets, and they had a facility a few blocks away that the downstairs was the stable for their horses and their carriages and their hearses. And then upstairs they built caskets. And then down through the years, they decided it was more lucrative to, let somebody else build the caskets. So they went out of that part of the business. But
it's interesting that in that early time that they brought the funerals into the funeral home.
Yes.
We were still doing home funerals.
Yeah. And they still obviously had a lot of home funerals, but they were really, they always said that the Gawlers were very innovative. Supposedly they came up with the whole concept of having headlights on when they had automated vehicles. They had the first motorized hearse in DC. But, going back to that era too, there were a lot of funeral homes in DC. They had a lot of competition. Mm-hmm. And they really did. I was amazed. And some of them there was a Lee Funeral Home. They're still in business up in Maryland. They buried like President McKinley. And I found in the Gawler archives, I found a picture of Mr. Lee and his staff. And they're all standing around him. It's probably early 1900s. And it was marked that that's who it was. So I gave that to the Lee family. I guess they have a display of things from McKinley's funeral. But McKinley is one of my favorite. I collect McKinley memorabilia, and I'm always on the outlook for that. So, but they had a lot of competition. And people ask me, did you bury Abraham Lincoln? No, sadly, we did not. But I will tell you a little story about Abraham Lincoln. Had a son that died in the White House, Willie Lincoln.
Yeah.
And they had a service there in the White House. And then they took him to Oak Hill Cemetery. And there was the clerk of the Supreme Court had a mausoleum in Oak Hill on the lower shelf of mausoleums. And they allowed the Lincoln family to place him in that. And Lincoln would go there on occasion and sit in this little mausoleum and talk to his son. And he would take a horse and ride out to the cemetery and do that. So when I first got to Washington, of course, I had to go find the Thomas Carroll Mausoleum. And it has a gate on the front where you can look inside and you can see the crypt plates. So I asked the guy in charge of the cemetery, I said, because there was nothing there to signify that that's what happened there. I said, do you suppose the cemetery would allow me to put a historic marker here? And he liked the idea, but then I had to go through the red tape of an overeducated board of directors. And I had to find the descendants of William Thomas Carroll, which I did. There was a physician in Bethesda. When I ran the idea by him, he was thrilled. He said, actually, he says, my nickname in our family was Tad, which was Lincoln's, one of his other sons. He said, my family in the past, they were great friends with the Lincolns. So I got permission from them. We went through a whole thing about, I had to like fact check what I wanted to write on the plaque. But if you go to Oak Hill Cemetery today and go down to that mausoleum, you can look through the gate and it tells the story of how Lincoln had his son placed there. And then he was taken out to go back with his father to Springfield after he was assassinated. So there again, the fact that I got the I got the opportunity to do that, being a Lincoln buff and everything, I can't even describe what that felt like to me the day we wheeled that down the bank with ropes and a cart. Oh, it was just, and put that marker inside of that mausoleum.
Just going through the hoops and to accomplish that is
the red tape. They couldn't settle on my font type. Okay, seriously. And it was on a bronze plaque mounted to a granite slant marker. And then they said they didn't like the border. I needed a 19th century border. So I eventually proved that what I had was in the 19th. I mean, it was just, but it was like way overdone as far as their scrutiny on it and all. But yeah, we got it accomplished. It took me a year and a half.
Earlier, everybody wants to be in charge.
Yeah. The superintendent, he was great. It was all the board of directors. I wanted to make sure I wasn't overstepping.
So somebody did ask a question here. Let me see. So they asked, for the present administration, is it one of the first tasks to ask who will be doing your service, or do they strongly recommend for gullers to be used?
The thing is, I personally was never involved in any of those planning ahead sessions for, let's say, a president.
Yeah.
I'm going to say the military district of Washington are the ones that literally approach the incoming president.
Mm-hmm.
And I wouldn't be surprised, because we've worked so well with them for years. There might be a recommendation. Right. It's interesting because, like, in the Navy, I noticed we were doing a lot of like high naval officers, admirals, and there was a clergyman in the Navy that would interact with us each time because he'd be part of the service. And he definitely, I didn't ask him to, but I know he was recommending us. And then one of the admirals lost a child, and they said, this person had said, you need to call Gallers. They'll walk you through all of this. So yes, I'm sure there's some of that. But if a family said, no, I want so-and-so, I mean, there's no exclusivity to it, I don't believe.
Mm-hmm.
But
because I'm trying to think, I know there were so many moving pieces for Senator McCain's service, and for him to be buried in at the Naval Academy.
Yes.
I know Michelle very well and things like that down at John Taylor Funeral Home.
Yep.
And what are the odds of that tonight?
Yeah. When you first told me John Taylor, I thought,
wow,
I'm channeling him.
I've heard that name before. I've been in his funeral.
But it's like, I would assume that there are contingency plans in place, and that, even once the current administration leaves office, that because, no matter whether, like President Bush was in Texas when he passed away, then got sent back to DC, then, back to Texas, President Reagan, California to DC, back to California.
There's plans on both ends.
Yeah. And, what now you do notice a common denominator, because if I'm sure with, like you said, LHT, that they're going to then use the resources from inside the company. So
Well, I will stop you there because um, when Reverend Billy Graham died, the Graham family had a plan was in place,
right.
but they were friends also with the Moore Funeral Home
Okay.
in Asheville, I think it was, and they literally ran it with their name, that portion of it down there, and giving them like top billing.
So they LHC pretty much took their nameplates.
Yeah, they
You know
were.
what I mean?
And matter of fact, I believe whoever worked there worked on the services and everything down there as well.
Oh,
So
okay.
it's it's like they want to do it in a friendly way, like
Yeah, absolutely.
you know, you know what I mean. You don't really want the reputation of you just march in and tell everybody what to do. I mean, people have connections, but at the same time, you take a service like that. Let's say that happened up here in little Corning, New York. Okay, Duane, Reverend Dr. Billy Graham just passed away. You're in charge of the funeral. And we want to do this, this, and this. We're going to take him here. We're going to move. We're going to take him to the Capitol Rotunda. Do you think that me sitting here in Corning, I would have had a first clue about?
Nope.
No.
Nope.
But a company like that, that's experienced in that stuff, can come in. If they say, well, Duane, you knew the Grahams, so we're going to put your name on the cars, and we'll announce that Hills Funeral Home is assisting, or we're assisting Hills Funeral Home.
Yeah.
So that's the thing is, I would have been overwhelmed at that point in my life and career. I would have welcomed.
I know
the details are just, the book is that thick about the plan.
and this is why it would have been nice if Catherine would have been able to join us, because one of the last year she was called upon, her and her husband and their team, to perform services for 3 officers who were slain in the line of duty, and they were 3 services simultaneously all at one time. And the moving pieces and the meetings that her and her husband went and sat in with, whether it's state police or local jurisdictions, the fire department, this person, that person, it's just like, we know what we have to do. We're here to support the family and make sure that we're here at this time. Everything else, the pomp and circumstance, I default. You know what I mean?
We're in charge of the care of the deceased.
Yeah.
Getting them where they need to be at what time. But we would also, if a family was traveling in from out of state, we would meet their plane, obviously get the remains, but then we were in charge of like their luggage too. So we'd have a van or 2 on the other side of the plane unloading their luggage, and then we would get that luggage to the corresponding hotels they were staying in. And then we would have cars available to that family and a driver wherever they needed to go or wanted to go. If they called at midnight and says, I want to go get some pizza. I mean, our responsibility was to look after that family.
See, you don't think about those details. Like, you see a state funeral and you're like, it's just these guys, they pick the family up and they get them to the service. They don't understand that you guys are still traditional funeral directors. Yeah. You're there for that family until the end of the service.
Right. And then some of those long drawn out, several day long services every night, however many vehicles we had out, come back to the funeral home to be cleaned. We'd be washing those cars and detailing them at midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, have to be back at 5 or 6 in the morning to get ready to go to the next whatever. I mean, it's just, and I tell people, it may seem glamorous, and there is a certain element of a thrill to some of that.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of work involved. And my job as the president of Gullers too is all these people that were coming into the location to help us. I had to feed them. I had to get them to their hotels, back and forth to their hotels, and then get them to the airport at the end. In the meantime, maybe from Enterprise, we needed 10 SUVs, and then the day the funeral's over with, everybody comes back, the cars are sitting there, 10 SUVs sitting in the parking lot. They all have to go back to Virginia somewhere by us, and it's just like, so there's so much more involved in moving pieces that are really very manual, some really manual labor. And, you do it, you're cheerful. I thank everyone. I feed them, like I say, I try to take care of them, but that's a whole, and we would, each one of those vehicles, we would have to prepare a kit to have in the vehicle. Every conceivable thing that could go wrong. Maybe a brand new pair of nylon stockings in case some lady got a run in her stocking. I mean, a sewing kit, Tylenol. I mean, anything you can think of are in these kits, and then snacks, because you got people.
I'm sure there would be requests by the family to have
beverages. I mean, we would have all that ready. Every vehicle went out of there was equipped with, hopefully, whatever little slight emergency came up would be.
Chris has a coffee convo in the morning, and people
yeah.
that what happens behind the scenes, the hours, the middle of the night, the things that you're thinking about. Well, I woke up at 4:00 in the morning, the brain starts working, and you don't shut it down until the service is over.
Well, I can only imagine that amplified 30 times on a service like this. Well, how did you sleep in 12 years, Duane?
In between high-profile services. No, but you would have all these extra people in the building too. But hey, guess what? We still have all our other business to manage.
Right. Exactly.
And even I remember hearing about during the Kennedy time period, because they set up what they call a death watch in the Red Room on the second floor. But there was just a lot of hubbub, people coming and going. And the Gaulers were concerned about all the other families they were serving, that they didn't want them to feel like they were second place, So yeah, sometimes I can remember a couple of times I literally, because some of these directors would just take it for granted, They could be sitting in the other room talking loud on their phone. It's like, hey, we've got arrangements going on right here in that room right there.
Right.
You gotta respect what we have going on here because we have a business to take care of as well.
Yep.
Like I said before, if it was just high profiles, we'd be out of business,
Absolutely. Now, so if you are doing a state funeral, are you still serving families and still taking first calls?
Absolutely.
Really? So so the building doesn't just shut down. So whether it's not like all the directors are pulled just to work the state funeral. Correct. If a new call comes in, hey, you're taking and doing that call.
That's where I would try to balance out. Okay, on the last one, you got to go and help on it. This time, I need you to, somebody's got to stay back at the funeral home and take care of the rest of them with it. I tried to be fair with that because, especially for a young funeral director just coming up through, like the opportunity to be involved in John McCain's funeral or someone else's.
Yeah.
If you always just pick the same people, that's not good for morale.
Well, that's not why they came to work at Gullers.
Right, exactly. And I've actually heard that before.
Really?
Yeah.
They had somebody. Oh, wow. Okay.
Well,
yeah, for you to be able to say, "Hey, I drove the car for so and so's funeral."
Well, if you're at Gullers and you're, behind the scenes and you're helping, and if you weren't pushing the casket down the aisle at the Washington Cathedral, you're still very much a part of what went on there.
Yep.
And if you want to call it bragging rights, go for it. But you're a part of this team. But we can't just abandon ship. We can't all go on the service.
A lot of moving parts.
Exactly. And I think for the most part, the people that were there any length of time, they understood that. It's just, one another cool experience. You asked something about McCain, and I was privileged. When John McCain passed away, his 106-year-old mother was still alive.
Wow.
And I was her driver. Okay. I took her to all the services. She lived in D.C., and she was a hoot. She was as sharp as a tack. And I believe she lived to be 108. But that was such a surreal, but a cool experience interacting with her on several occasions. And we had a few light moments. We had gone to the Capitol. I'm pulling up onto the Capitol Plaza, and she got my first name down right on the first time we met. And she says, Duane, what's this big building? She wanted you to think that she didn't know what was going on. And And then on the way back, and I had in the back seat, I had her nurse and her naval escort because her husband had been an admiral. And we're coming back by the Kennedy Center and getting ready to go into the Kennedy. And she looks at me and she says, Duane, she says, I didn't realize you were taking me clear to San Francisco. And I said, the car got quiet and I looked at her. I said, ma'am, you got on the wrong bus. And the whole car just erupted in laughter. She laughed, but it was just some really lighthearted moments and a very kind of sad occasion, So those are the kinds of things you just can't. I mean, until you live that, or you've all had experiences. I know of when you connect with a family, to that level.
You know when you're safe to be able to play that.
Oh yeah. I wouldn't have done that at the first moment, but I was bouncing off on her, the way she was behaving.
So somebody asked, were there embalming chemicals back during the Gullers times? And 1805?
Well, no, 1850. But
1850. Yeah.
What I'm going to say about that is, I have a feeling that Gullers weren't necessarily embalming bodies in 1850. I think that progressed along because embalming really didn't come along in much degree until the Civil War in 1860s.
Yeah.
Now, like Lincoln was embalmed and all that, but he was embalmed by a physician, a doctor's group. I think that all came into being in the 1860s, actually. So for that first 10 years, they were using, ice chests probably. He would load up. They had a little chalkboard on the outside of the original building. Matter of fact, it's in the museum there. The original little chalkboard. People would write down a name and address if someone died in the night, and Guller would see that information in the morning, and he'd call for a vehicle and all, and they'd load up the ice chest, and head out to that address. So, and then they would go back, deliver a casket the day of. Body would get put in the casket. Gullers would be involved in that and taking them on to the church or the cemetery. So, it all just kind of progressed into what we know the funeral service to be today. From those initial, okay, I'm the one providing the casket. Let me help you get the body in the casket, right? I got the transportation to get it to the cemetery and whatnot. This is a cute little story too that I was told. When telephones came into being, they had a phone line over to where the hearses were kept and all, the horse-drawn hearses and all. And Gullers he'd call over there and ask for a hearse or something. And then he would walk over there just to he wasn't confident that they got the message. So he didn't trust the phone. I'm thinking, will you talk to them?
Well, even us, I know there's times where if it's like, man, my phone hasn't rung once today. I haven't gotten a single thing from the answering service. I will actually call the funeral home.
Yeah.
I'm just checking the lines, making sure everything's good.
Many times through the years. Yeah.
Now, David asked that, when a senator or a high-ranking Congress member passes, do they send like the U.S. Capitol Police to guard the decedent while they're at the funeral home?
No, but I will tell you, I hired some security in the past. And it's interesting because I had two, I don't want to say, Capitol Police officers worked part-time for me. Mm-hmm. And I did have them on several occasions come and sit overnight when I had a high profile in the building. And I won't say the name, but the very first one that I dealt with, I was nervous. There's something about that cell phone.
Oh, absolutely.
And even though we have signs down around the prep room and all, like no phones. So, you want to lose your job in a hurry or ruin your career. So I locked this gentleman in his casket in my office. Because it was my first experience with, okay, I've got a person of this caliber in my building in a casket. And I locked him in my office. And on one other occasion, when I was in Texas, when that particular congressman died that I brought to Washington, we had just experienced a tornado had hit our main funeral home.
Oh, wow.
Tore it up. And we had a second smaller funeral home in the same town. So we were working out of that facility when this guy died, and the prep room had an outside entrance, like you back up to this ramp,
Yeah.
and I thought, so what I did was I took one of our vehicles, a van, and I pulled it up alongside of that door just as close. I mean, you couldn't have hardly slid a piece of paper between that van and that door. And I took the keys home with me for the vehicle. I thought, no
one's getting in.
No one's getting in there without me. So,
Yep.
I've heard horror stories. Okay. And we all
No,
have.
absolutely.
And all of a sudden something shows up on the internet, and who do you think's head's going to roll first, So, yeah, call it paranoid, but I mean, you just learn ways to deal with it.
Well, have you ever read Abbott and Haas, Pardon My Hearse?
No, I have not. Well, no, I don't think I've read it. No.
Yeah. So he talks about, they assisted and was called in to care for Marilyn Monroe when she passed away.
Mm-hmm.
And the very first thing they did before they even called the transfer team is they called the LA Sheriff's Department and called Pinkerton Security.
Yeah.
And said, we need as many armed people as you can to the mortuary by X, because as soon as the newspapers found out that Marilyn had passed away, they were putting out like $5,000, $10,000 bounties on the first picture that would be obtained of her.
Mm-hmm.
And people don't realize those are the things that, yes, you see the glitz, you see the glamour, but you don't see the staging. Because what is it, Frank Campbell, they sent out the decoy hearse for Heath Ledger.
I mean, they're literally right on the street. I mean, they've got
nothing.
They have no cover of any sort. I can work out the backside of the building, where they were definitely right on the street. But like the whole story behind the casket that Kennedy came back to Washington in and all.
Mm-hmm.
That was stored down we had a couple crypts, John, down in our basement, in the wall of the basement. And that casket was stored in there for a few months before they came and took it to the National Archives. But they were the government was feuding with the Neal Funeral Home out in Texas over the price of that casket. And so he makes a trip to Washington, says, okay, I'll take my casket back. He was offered $100,000 for it, and back in 63 or 4. And so the government finally decided they better try to figure out a way to sell them. They didn't want it to become like a circus attraction, it would travel the country. And they sank it in the ocean eventually. But I don't know if anybody came there to see it, back in that day or not, but it was stored down there for a while.
Speaking of transfers, when you do a high profile, how many times do you use a casket to transfer so that no one can get a picture of the body, or do you use security around the transfer team?
All I would say is, the whole time I was there was only one time that we were asked to bring a casket to take the body out of an apartment. And there again, it was a high profile person, and we practiced that for a while because the person hadn't passed yet. And we knew the scope. They lived in the Watergate building. We knew the layout, and they didn't want to go out the main exits and all that. And so we would have to take the body out onto a patio area over a little knee wall and all this stuff. So we went out and set up a fake, outside of the funeral home, and we practiced doing that, getting over the wall and all this stuff. Well, in the end, we didn't use the casket, but they even said if he dies in the hospital, we want you to. I thought the hospital's not going to be too fond of us coming in there
with a casket.
Oh my gosh! So, anyways, it never had to happen, but no, it's a lot of times. Let's say like the Watergate building, because we took a lot of people out of the Watergate building, and they would say, come in a nondescript vehicle, and there was an entryway down into the parking area, and they would meet us and walk us right through. They would, take us where we needed to go, and it never really became an issue there. And so typically, I never really encountered that as an issue. Like if you went to Walter Reed or something, I mean, it was pretty, standard that people go there to pass, and then people were not that curious as to what was going on.
And they have you so far down in the basement to
Yeah.
get them out anyhow. How
Yeah.
many levels of garage go down underneath of that hospital?
Because I can only recall from any history that I truly would be comfortable and confident saying, the only people I know that have ever truly been prepared and removed from their was what Jacqueline Kennedy, her
Yeah.
apartment in New York. She was actually prepared there and pallbeared out from her place of death.
Yeah.
And of course, Queen Elizabeth. I think she was prepared at Balmoral Castle.
I got to meet and have dinner with the funeral director from Scotland that handled her service at the Scotland piece of it.
Oh, Mr. Is it Purvis?
Yeah, Tim Purvis.
Yeah.
He's like sixth generation, and she had a plan several hundred pages long, depending on where she passed, and she wanted to die at Balmoral, and they figured that's why she went there to New. Time was close, so yeah, he's got quite a story too to tell.
Yeah, I've reached out to him. He was on a holiday, and he's definitely going to get back because I want to see if we can work out something for them to get on and talk. Because I know he received a little bit of heat because he forgot to take the nameplates out of the hearse.
Yeah, well, it was an emblem on the back window.
Yeah,
and they didn't think twice about it. And the strange part about it was the contrast between that and the flag over her casket made it stand out even more.
Yeah.
And then, so
I think they broke the internet that day in Scotland, from what I understand.
Well, and there again, the things that can go wrong.
Yeah, if it's good, Murphy's Law, right?
Yeah, I mean, there was another case on a First Lady's service where when the pallbearers lifted the casket, the cart started to roll away. Did you see that? And the person in the back was supposed to reach down and grab it. And so then he went immediately around and got it in front of the whole deal. But I talked to him. I wasn't there, but he said what happened was the president was in a wheelchair. His son was pushing the wheelchair. And when he went to bend down to grab a hold of the cart, he clipped him in his shins.
Oh.
So it startled him, and he comes back up and the cart goes wrong. I said, well, if it can happen, it happens. So
when you talked earlier about pallbearers, I thought of that usually they have one guy in the back and he wants to step forward and there's a church truck underneath of him and startled. They kind of forget about that.
And it doesn't matter how much instructions you give to pallbearers too. They don't really pay attention to you. That's been my whole career. That doesn't have to be high profile.
I've always told them, treat them like first graders. You have to educate them exactly what they have to do, and they still mess up.
Yeah.
So Jill asked that for multiple locations, Duane, like multiple states, does that change the way that you would embalm a decedent to preserve for a longer period of time? I think any of us could answer that one.
Yeah, there again, do the correct job the first time, right?
You don't have to worry.
Yeah. It was interesting because they always talked about when Lincoln went back on his 20-day funeral train ride or whatever, that they had to be re-embalmed and re-embalmed. I never really knew what they meant by that. Probably
one of the
cosmetics, right? Yeah. So.
And now one thing to note too is that with certain normal SCI firms, there's a care center where loved ones are taken to, but for Gallers, everything is still performed in-house.
Yes.
100%.
Yes. All the while I was there, yes, and yes.
As of last March, because just like when we were given a tour, we had to sign documentation, and then when we went downstairs, we had to actually we didn't lock them, but there was a basket in a separate room where, there was no loved one. There was not a single decedent in the care center. However, our cell phones still remained outside of the threshold of going into that room.
Yep.
Now, Karen asked, and I don't know if you can answer this or not, but does the family or the government pay for high-profile funerals?
A little bit of both. Okay. Um, if they're sitting in office still, the government definitely pays for part of that. Or if they're flown on Air Force One or a government plane. Um, but I've also had occasions where literally the family signs a dollar contract and they're the ones that pay the funeral home. So it really just depends on the situation at the time. There was a family that got flown back west, and I don't think I was supposed to receive the email, but I got the email from that spelled out their flight, their government flight, and I was quite shocked at the price. And I thought, well, they yes, that person was still in office, but wow, when you have the money you have, you couldn't help the American people out and
Yeah.
pay for yourself. But yeah, it really depends. Most of the moving pieces of a presidential state funeral are covered. And there again, if LHT is involved, Gallers, we don't have a contract for that. They have a contract with LHT. So
you're pretty much billing LHT for whatever resources or expenditures Gullers
correct
incurs.
Now there's, but if a family calls Gallers and we call it a Gallers call,
yeah,
then, and people always ask me, well, do you charge more? And no, we use our GPL. Now, if you order 20 vehicles, then you're going to pay for 20 vehicles.
Right.
But you get the GPL charges for your embalming and your super. It's
the same. Yeah, it's funeral arrangements.
Right, and I'm sure there's not much money made on it because of all the extra personnel and everything. Yeah, it's just. But I guess it's just the fact that you're doing it. You get the. I don't think credit's the right word, but you get the notoriety for doing it. I don't know, whatever that means, but if you, it's like if you practice someone's funeral for 10 years, what's the cost involved in that? I don't think there's a bottom line for that. It says
because you're still paying all the drivers. Because it's not just you and the hearse and an empty casket going out and meeting one or two military liaison.
No,
it's full pomp and circumstance at 3:00 in the morning.
Yeah, I'll never forget. It was probably like 5 a.m. in front of the National Cathedral, and they would do it early in the morning to try and offset tourists and people going to work. But this lady comes up to there's a little knee wall there, and she says, "Is this a funeral for Dick Cheney?" This was years ago. Oh, ma'am. But anyways, we'd be at the Capitol Plaza at 4 a.m. We'd have to go up. First of all, we would go to Fort Myer, and that's where you would get your little badge and everything, and then they would take us in a motorcade to the Capitol, and the Capitol is quite pretty at 4 a.m. When it's illuminated, it's like orange color, the whole dome. I don't know how to describe it. It's pretty awesome. And then we would practice arrivals and departures several times. The military would carry the casket up into the rotunda. And then maybe the next day we would go to the Washington Cathedral and do the same kind of thing. Arrivals, departures, as if you had the family with you. You had the people in front of that, like the clergy and the military brass would arrive. Their vehicles would arrive first, and then the family vehicles, the hearse. And it was always either hotter than Hades or cold. Like when you're out on the tarmac at Andrews Air Force Base in the middle of August. I can't even describe that. And then they say, let's do that again. It's like, And then what they would do at the end of the week, the military would actually film us, all the steps. So we'd go Andrews Air Force Base, get the casket and the family, and we would zoom on to the Capitol, go up on the Capitol Plaza, take the casket in, all the pomp and circumstance. There'd be a lady portraying the first lady, and her car would go in a certain area, and they would take her up into the Capitol, and she'd come out on the porch to receive the body coming up the steps. And then we would go from there to the Washington Cathedral, and then we would go back to Andrews Air Force Base and put it on the plane all in a day, and they would film it, and then they would critique it. And people say, well, why'd you do it so many times a year? Because the military piece changes up constantly. They
Oh,
get deployed different, or promoted. So you're not dealing with the same group always.
Yeah, Duane Hill was doing it for 12 years, but you had 15 different commandants or
Yeah.
admirals or whatever.
And there were some that were really nice. There was this one guy, I can't remember what his rank was, but we used to also go to RFK Stadium parking lot to practice motorcade driving. Oh my God. And you had to be a certain distance between the car ahead of you going, I don't know, it was like 40 or 45 miles an hour. Well, that's pretty difficult in a closed field. And we had radios in the car. And this Army officer would be just screaming at us. And I thought, so finally the guy that was in charge of LAST, he gets a hold of the guy, the head of the military district of Washington. He says, okay, I'll tell you what, we are not in the military. And if you don't do something about that guy, we're going to take our toys and we're going home. That was the end of that guy. It was just like, come on. I mean, he's like barking like a drill sergeant at us. It's like, you have to get into the groove of that, going that speed, keeping a certain distance. And they'd be yelling, car number 4, move forward, and it's just.
Even in our small locales, trying to keep people together is tough.
Yeah.
Stay one car behind the one in front of you, and you look back in your rear view, and there's 15 car space in between them.
Yeah.
and people zigzagging in and out.
We would have to double stack them, and all these different maneuvers. And
how about extra? You said about extra vehicles. Did you have to have like additional limos, backup, and additional hearse ready to go in case something happened?
Yes. If you could see the full procession, there is an empty hearse at the very end, and possibly an extra limo or an extra sprinter bus. We got in a situation at the cathedral once where we had a bunch of the family members on a sprinter bus, and that's a real tight. When you pull in there, you go up there's a little circle thing that you got to turn right, and you go up on the sidewalk and come down in front of the cathedral. And this bus hit the curb and blew a tire, but we had a backup. So while everyone's in the service, we're switching out vehicles. But what that did was, then that created a vacuum of, now we don't have that backup, but we still got to go to Andrews. So we called down to the funeral home, and Andrew Van Dusen we had a 6-passenger limo that we weren't using. So he's trying to come up down Wisconsin Avenue. And when they have those, they have the streets are blocked off by big snow plows and dump trucks, and they weren't going to let him through. And he says, I've been asked to come to the cathedral immediately. And they said, no way. So finally, one of the Secret Service people came down. They knew he was coming, and they literally had to move a dump truck to let him in. But they told him, stand back or we're going to arrest you. And he says, look, I got to get to the cathedral. This is a backup vehicle. Of course, anybody could tell you. And he patted him down and let him through. And then he trailed with that all the way to Andrews just for an extra vehicle. But yeah, there's always, and that bus deal proved why we do it. Verified. Why do you do this?
I got tears in my eyes right now because I can just imagine him, because I know Andrew, so I can only imagine him being like, put your hands in the air, what do you got in your pocket, sir?
The guy was really going after him. He said, eventually somebody showed up.
He wasn't vetted yet at Andrew.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Every time we did this, we'd have to give our social security number, our date of birth, the license plate number, the registration number of the vehicles. There was always a lot of that back and forth to begin with, just to get on the grounds or, to get into the procession.
Now here's a good one. So Duane, when does a private time take place for the family, where they can, view the loved one, or where does that take place, if at all?
Yes, and it does happen. And if it does happen, it typically is at Gawler's. We have a room called the Eisenhower Room. It's where President Eisenhower was laid out. It's a beautiful room with wormy chestnut walls and that were put in at the request of Mamie Eisenhower. That's why we named it after him. But yes, they do. they'll come and view them. Very, very seldom does a high profile have a full tilt visitation. It's usually a very private time with immediate family, or sometimes the staff, like if it's a congressman or something, maybe their staff would come in as well. But yeah, it does happen, and not as often as we would like it to.
Yeah.
But some people still see the value in that. Thank goodness.
Yeah, right. So we got about 15 minutes. So we've got one block west of the White House. So that is Guller's history up to 1970.
1970. That's this one.
That's that one. And then now it is not a continuation of anything related to Guller's, but you also have your second book.
Right. But there is, it's all funeral stories, and some of them are Guller's.
Right.
Like I wrote about what happened to the guy that shot McKinley, what happened to the guy that shot Garfield.
Okay.
So they're not just the typical storyline. It goes off in a different direction. And like
So
Phil shared, go ahead. I'm sorry.
And that one also, like you said, that goes into J. Edgar Hoover's service, other notable names throughout the district.
Yeah. I'll just look at the chapter list here.
Yeah.
It's funny how quickly you forget what you wrote about.
All the little nuances, just like moving a plow truck to get a limo in, and
right.
Who has the wrong color shoes on, and they have to change them out or something. And
I wrote a chapter on the attending physicians that attended Abraham Lincoln the night he died. I wrote a chapter on a dressmaker that was Mary Lincoln's dressmaker, a mulatto lady. I wrote about the Reverend William Pinckney. He was an Episcopal priest in the area there. About a couple guys that were in the government that were on the Titanic. How President Truman escaped being assassinated. So it's some interesting stories.
Yeah. So everybody, I put it on the little scroller here.
Yes, I can see that
at the bottom. There, that is Duane's email. If you guys will email him, and he'll let you know what to do, and he can get the books out to you very, very quickly.
Yeah, I have the books. I sign them. I mail them, so I have total control over that. And if somebody orders one, I usually send it the same day or the next day. So
yeah.
What's your wife say about taking up the spare room with all the extra books?
They're in a closet under a stairway leading to the basement. It's like perfect.
Duane, how much are one or both of the books?
Okay, well, this one, the first one, it retailed $45 to begin with. I lowered it to $35 for your audience, and then this one was like $35, so I'm going to say $25 on this one, the second one.
So if you email Duane, just let him know you're coming from Chris, Catherine, or As the Hearse Turns, and he'll take care of you. If it's any other podcast, it's full price.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I again, there is so much history there, and I am going to have to get you to just start recording some stories and things like that, just so that's also in perpetuity, like we talked about before we went live, like with Todd and those experiences and things like that. And there's a way that we can do it for sure with still honoring non-disclosures and things like that, and do it tastefully, because that's history that it's not being passed down anymore, because it seems like so many people just want to be in the front seat of the hearse and on to the next service and running down the road, and they don't want to know the history, and it's sad.
Well, and you only know what you've experienced, where if you listen to someone else who's experienced a greater funeral, high profile, or just different, then when it happens to you at your little local funeral home, you go, I've heard a story one time about that, and he said to do this.
Yeah. Well, and in my career too, I mean, my head is full of stories from when I was just a rural funeral director. We
Well,
all
I
have those.
rent hearses, and I had experience one time. If the brand new hearse, first time they use it, it wouldn't start.
Yeah.
Security system went haywire on the car, and it would not start.
Yeah.
And what do you do? And I'm miles from where I rent the hearse,
Yeah.
and you punt, and like, mom didn't want to go yet. She's fighting
Yeah.
us all the way. So, and the
Yeah.
family laughed it off, and we eventually got to church, and it happens. But until it happens, it's only
I kind of pride myself in over those years of meeting families and dealing with little mini crises and things, that I somehow mastered calming people down when something went wrong. I don't know. It's just like I have this natural ability to sit and sincerely speak with someone to turn a bad situation around. And I don't know. I mean, you have to learn to apologize, admit, that something went wrong. But I've had a great career. I have no regrets about my career whatsoever. I would do it all over again if I had to start from scratch.
That was my next question. Had you known now, or what is that saying? Had you known now what you know then, would you do it all over again?
I do believe I would. Now I just, it's been very rewarding just from the personal context. I mean, the people that I'm still in touch with that I met 30 years ago because when I moved back to this area, this is where I'm from. And it's kind of like I just picked up where I left off with a lot of folks. And it's just, I was gone for quite a few years, but, and they're all interested to know what I was doing. And it's just, but I've come full circle. My kids live here locally, my grandkids. So now I'm enjoying that part of my life as well.
I was going to go back to say a comment of Mr. Coleman that I bought the funeral home from over 18 years ago. He always said, one, never let them see you sweat.
Yeah.
And don't run.
Don't run. I know.
Never run.
I have told so many young funeral directors, whatever you do, because you're the only one that might even know something's wrong.
Yes.
Exactly.
Running means panic. I said, don't ever run.
And then
I remembered that the day that the hearse wouldn't start, and he had that experience one time, and I just laughed it off like, yep, this is how it's going to go.
Yeah.
And then Chad's asking now, Duane, are you doing any touring for conventions or anything like that where people will be able to pick up the books?
I have gone to quite a few conventions since the book came out. As of right now, I do not have anything scheduled like that as far as funeral conventions, but you never know. I was in Michigan a couple months ago. I spoke on a panel at their convention up there. But if I do go, I usually have some copies of my book with me, but I did tour around some.
And then now, if anybody that's here that is from associations or conventions, they would be able, if they wanted to, they can reach out to you via email and see if it'd be something to have Duane come out and speak.
Yeah, email is the best way, I think, to communicate.
Yeah, absolutely.
I know I first had my first association with Duane at a convention. I think it was PFDA convention years ago.
Oh, okay.
And great speaking engagement, the history of the Gallers, just a lot of information, even how you developed the museum at the Gallers Funeral Home.
Yeah.
Redoing the rooms with all the woodwork and where the wood came from and so forth. It was a great experience.
Yeah, and Kristen, you probably saw the room with all the portraits, right?
That's where we actually had dinner at.
Yeah.
That room was phenomenal.
Yeah. When we were getting ready to do that, they asked me if I had any ideas about that room. I said, well, there's a hotel on Pennsylvania Avenue called the Willard Hotel. Very famous. Americans came there and stayed before they would take office and inaugurations and all that. And I went there years ago, and I'm sitting at the bar. It was called the Round Robin Bar, and there were portraits all over the walls of famous Americans that stayed there. Yeah, and I had that whole idea, and that's what I went to. Hello there.
Hello.
Hey, Caitlin.
So that's where we came up with the idea of coming up with some portraits. And then this funeral director from Richmond was an artist, and it's all her original work in there. It's just
because I
Unbelievable.
mean the
This
room,
is
the
my
way.
boss.
Yes, Caitlin is John's boss,
I'm
also
glad
his
I got
daughter.
to meet you, Duane.
You too, Caitlin.
So now, Dwayne, are you going to be out in Charlotte?
I haven't really made a reservation or a decision on that yet, to be honest with you.
Okay.
Come and be a
'Cause-
participant for a change instead of the headliner.
Yeah. You know, one of the weird things too is when I first embarked on this, I went to the Simpsons had a museum down in um, Virginia, Chatham, Virginia, a funeral museum.
Mhm.
People that owned Mastercraft Casket at the time, and I remember going there, and I was green just out of the gate of this whole Gawler thing, and all of a sudden, oh, he's from Gawler, the president of Gawler's, and and people are like, oh, my picture with you. I just left there thinking, what was that all about? That was so weird to me. It was just very bizarre. It's like, yeah, I might not be a month from now or a year from now, but you met the president of Gawler's. I get dressed in the morning just like all the rest of you. My
But
stress level might be a little higher on certain days, but that's my choosing too.
like I said, funeral anxiety is a real thing for funeral directors every single day, but I can only imagine like the night before, a state funeral, sitting there laying in bed, you're probably not sleeping and thinking, did I do this? Is this good? Or do all the cars have gas? Do they all have tissues? Do they have this? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Did I
and
lock my office door?
when it's over, you just crash and burn.
I was going to say, what is the average not burnout, but career span for someone, not only like a regular director at Gullers or someone that is actually working as a director for LHT?
Well, when I went to Gawler's, there was a director there. He'd been there probably 15 years.
Okay.
And he retired from there within 3 or 4 more years. I was there 12 years. We did have a considerable amount of turnover. There again, back to the issues of how expensive it was to live there, or the commute would get, they would get down and out about the commute. But like the lady at the front desk, I mean, she lived 3 or 4 blocks away. She'd been there 20 some years. Mrs. Fusco, she was excellent on the phone. Oh my gosh, I would have loved to have cloned her. But they have a really sharp receptionist there right now, Renee Soto, and she does a phenomenal job too. And we had one guy that he dealt with the cars. He's been there probably 15 to 20 years now. He wouldn't necessarily have the stress maybe of a funeral director, but he had to have.
I don't know if you got to back down that driveway, man.
Well, that and around the corner. You saw the corner they had to go around, right? There were only 3 or 4 of us that did that were allowed to back the cars into that garage. But yeah, there were some people who had been there a while, and and we picked up, like I told you, I had a Capitol police officer that worked there. He was just phenomenal. He loved to, like if a family or a widow or something needed to be picked up and brought to the funeral home or taken, he loved that job, and he was good at it. He just, they always liked him, the people that he worked with. And so we had one person that was all they did was death certificates, because the 3 jurisdictions there, and each one having different requirements.
Well, DC Vital Records is just a nightmare to deal with in general.
I was on the regulatory board there for
I
don't know, about 6 years, and I'm just going to tell you that first of all is a thankless position, and your hands are so tied to all the rules and the regulations and things that to even if you had a bad actor and you were trying to get them in line, it would end up in like they'd be investigated. They find out, well, this person's they're not even licensed, but they're signing death certificates, and it's just like, until they may still be doing it. I don't know. You just never got anything
accomplished.
Yeah, it was just. I don't know. Or they would appear before a judge and say, well, give them another opportunity. It's just, and there were 3 or 4 bad actors. It was always about those 3 or 4 locations, and have to it, I guess.
Until you have something like that broke loose in Maryland and something like going on in
Yes.
Chicago, most
Yeah.
politicians don't want to be proactive. They'd rather be reactive. And
Yeah.
we as the funeral professionals get stuck holding the bag.
Yeah.
But
Oh, I know. So,
But again, everybody make sure shoot Duane an email if you want to get these books. He'll get them out to you. I'm gonna reach out to him. Because I would need to get Saints and Sinners now, and go from there. Uh, Duane, thank you so much for taking the time.
it was fun to speak with you folks and your audience.
Great
And
having
John,
with you.
Nice to meet
Thank-
you, Jeff and Caitlin.
Nice to
so
meet you.
you guys hang tight real quick, and everyone else, we will see you guys soon. Going into September, our next guest is going to be Miss Monica Torres, and Caitlin will be able to, or Catherine will be able to talk to you more about that. And we may have an extra pop up with someone I think everyone would be interested to talk to. So we'll see you all again soon. Everybody else, just hang tight. Let's go.